Everyone, I'm Ahana.
And I'm Celine.
And welcome to another episode at the We Are podcast. So, today we have a news updates for y'all. There were not that many big cases this week, so we have less updates, but still good. Good. All right. So, I'll start it off with kind of a continuation of one of last week's updates, and it is about the protesting going on in Iran. If you haven't already, I encourage you to listen to our last week's episode because we talked about the murder of Mahsa Amini, and that's kind of important to understand this little segment. But for background, in case you were wondering, Mahsa Amini was a 22-year-old young woman in Iran who was arrested by the morality police, which is basically a thing in Iran that they kind of drive around and are able to examine women's dress and determine whether it's modest enough, whether they have a mandatory hijab, and the morality police determines whether they are dressed modestly enough, whether their hijab's on properly, whether their clothing's too tight, and if they determine that it is not appropriate, then they are able to arrest women and basically do whatever they want to them. And it's a terrible thing. A lot of countries with radical Iran or radical Islamic rulers and people that run the country, their governments are radically Islamic, they do have a lot of similar situations. And in this case, Mahsa Amini was arrested by the morality police and she was beaten and she eventually died. Many believe due to her injuries, but the government says it's because of a heart attack, even though people eyewitnesses specifically saw her getting beaten in a van and falling and getting severe head trauma. So yeah, that's definitely something. But recently there has been a lot of protests surrounding her death. A lot of people are going in the streets and protesting the strict Iranian government dress code, specifically that's targeted towards women. And they're also just burning their hijabs and cutting their hair in solidarity with the situation. So that's been happening a lot, but the government's response to it has not been good at all. These two cases are the two people I'm going to be talking about specifically today, and this is Nika Shakarami and Serena Esmailzadeh, and they have died during protests in Iran. So if you think about what happened to Mahsa Amini, her case was probably one of the only televised cases, but there's so many other cases that have been super on the low, but they've been basically kind of protesting that. On September 20th, though, Nika disappeared inside the city of Tehran hours after burning her hijab in a protest to the government. So she disappeared, and then 8 days after her disappearance, the police contacted her family and said that they found her body. And Nika's mother actually said that they stole her body away from the morgue that the family selected her body to be buried in, and then buried her in a village miles away from the family selected burial site, which it's just such a strange thing to in America that would not ever be allowed,
Definitely
ever.
Not.
So that's something interesting to know. Another thing with Serena, who is the Serena Esmailzadeh, she on September 23rd, which was 3 days after Nika's disappearance and death, she was beaten to death by police at a protest in Gohardast. So Serena was actually a popular YouTuber who would post videos of her advocating women's rights, and she would post videos a lot about inequality in Iran and so many different issues and how the mandatory hijab is such an outworldish thing. So there's a lot of videos on her talking about it, and you can actually find them on YouTube still. But she was seen being beaten to death, but the government actually said that she jumped off a building to commit suicide. And they said that for Serena, but they also said that Nika fell off a building. So these two women who were in different areas and have different backgrounds and were killed at different times, they both were the government said that they jumped off a building when eyewitnesses clearly saw them being beaten.
Yeah, they were clearly trying to cover it up. Just when they said that Mahsa Amini had died from a heart attack and stuff, and tried to make it seem like they weren't responsible for her death.
Yeah, and them coming up with the same excuse for both of them is just so weird to to me, but it's just so sad. Despite, like, these are 2 cases, but actually 185 protesters have died in these protests for Mahsa Amini, including 19 children. So these protests are like nothing we would see in the US. The US doesn't have anything like that, but this is like common in Iran, and because the government is so like strict about their rules, they are able to limit social media usage, and also they like cut off like internet and Wi-Fi for a lot of people, so they're unable to even like spread full stories and the information about like what's going on in Iran, because they don't even have access to the internet. So like we don't even really fully know everything that's happening. This is kind of just like what we've heard. But in other protest news, there was actually like a shooting that went down on September 30th at the Great Musalla of Zahedan. So that's basically like a place of worship, and a lot of people were gathering. I think it was like thousands of people were gathering to pray. But they were basically, some people like broke off from the prayer and started like chanting like slogans at the nearby police station, partially because of what happened to Mahsa Amini, and partially because there was also like another story going around in that area about a 15-year-old girl who got like raped in jail after she was arrested. So people were kind of like going to the police station to sort of protest that, and after that the police and like security agents were started to fire at the protesters from the rooftop of the police station, and they also began firing into the praying place, like the musalla, the place where people were praying, even if they weren't like a part of the protest, and even while they were still playing. So they shot a lot, and that became that now that what that happened, that became known in Iran as Bloody Friday, and it is by far the deadliest government crackdown against protesters since the demonstrations began. It's just so devastating to like see that that's so normalized in those places, and it's just it's just so awful.
It is. I think in America we have like the privilege to be able to like protest peacefully and not necessarily have consequences, but like in countries like Iran, you can't even protest against something as terrible as like Mahsa Amini's death without like getting cracked down upon, or you can't really protest about anything without like getting killed, getting injured, or just like facing severe consequences. So it's really terrible.
Yeah, and the government crackdowns have just been getting worse and worse. Like there's so many, like we don't even know what's going on because of like they don't have access to the internet to tell their stories. But like from what we've heard, like these shootings are like common, or like if not at least normalized. There's police violently like going against protesters, and it's just a disaster, honestly. So
I agree. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, so my next update is about Alex Jones. And I did an update about this like a couple weeks ago or like months ago, I'm not sure. But basically Alex Jones is a famous radio host, and he's really well known for InfoWars, which is like a show he hosts. And he's very radical, like he's a far right conspiracy theorist. So like he's made up a lot of like conspiracy theories about things. But one of like the biggest and most like disastrous claims he's made is that the Sandy Hook shooting was fake. And the Sandy Hook shooting was like this huge, horrible, like devastating shooting in 2012. And it was at an elementary school. 28 people died from that shooting. And he was like saying that it was like fake and all this stuff. And he was saying it was this whole conspiracy so like Democrats could like have more control on guns, and it was like this huge thing. Like he was making all these false claims about it, and it was just like the victims' families obviously were not very happy that he was saying that the shooting where like their children died was fake. So but on the good side, he's now being ordered to pay $965 million to the families of the victims over his false claims. And the families like sued him for defamation, which like defamation is like making a false claim made to ruin like someone's reputation, or just like a false statement with that intent. And like defamation, I feel like it's been like popularized with like the Johnny Depp like trial and stuff, so like we all kind of know like what that means at this point. But Jones's legal team has already vowed to appeal the award, so he's going to send it up to a higher court and try to like get a different verdict. And we're not sure what'll happen like with the appeal. Like they might say that the award of 965 million was too excessive, so they might like lower the amount, or they might say like, you know what, we're going to sue him for like even more. So it really just depends. But Alex Jones called the award a, quote, joke and a travesty in response. And another thing is whether he's able to actually, like, financially, like, procure the money for, like, the families, because he claims he has less than $2 million to his name. And he keeps saying this, like, during his InfoWars broadcasts. And he also, like, filed for bankruptcy earlier this year, but then like a forensic economist who like testified in the defamation case against him said that like the combined worth of some of his things could be as high as like 270 million. So there are a lot of like different views on whether he has actually enough money to like pay the victims' families and whether they're actually going to get that 965 million that they're supposed to be owed. So I guess we'll see like what happens with that, but yeah. It's a good step that he's being like held accountable for his claims, because it can be really damaging like when you say those like insensitive and like completely false things about like something as terrible as like a school shooting at an elementary school.
Yeah, so there's no possibility of him going to jail, though. It's just, like, him being charged.
No, it's just, like, him being charged to pay money for damages.
Yeah, I think that's common with, like, defamation cases.
Yeah, defamation cases usually it's just, like, you have to pay money in damages to, like, whoever you damaged, basically. Like, with the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, like, Amber had to pay Johnny, like, $15 million, but, like, she didn't, like, go to jail.
Yeah, okay.
So.
That's crazy. But that being said, I think that ends off our first tab.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for more updates.
All right, bye.
Welcome back to it. Oh my god.
The lighting's off, but I also how about we just
we're like literally putting our camera on a pumpkin because we have nothing else to hold it up.
We used to put it on an ironing board, but
oh yeah, that was the good old days. Anyways, moving on to our updates. I'm gonna start it off with something really, really sad, and it made me personally really sad because I am a big fan of this person and just his character. But Robbie Coltrane, who played Hagrid. If you don't know who Hagrid is, you need to go outside and touch some grass. But Hagrid is in the Harry Potter franchise, and he is like one of like Harry's first mentors, I would say.
Yeah.
And he played such an important role throughout the series, being like the big lovable giant.
Yeah.
I love Hagrid.
So sad. No, he was so
he was comforting, like literally my favorite character. He was honestly, so good.
Honestly,
I love him, and like Hermione were like my favorite characters.
Yeah, I liked Ginny and then Hermione and then like I don't know. And then I don't know. But Hagrid was always like a staple. Like he was
just always the most innocent, like naive. He like looks scary, but he's just so
he was like
sweet.
This comforting guy.
Yeah, and he was such a good guy, and he was just, his character was so good.
Yeah, and the acting was so good, too.
Yeah, and he was just this sweet little innocent, like, he looks so big and scary, but he's like this sweet little warm-hearted, like, naive little shrimp, and he's so cute. Okay, that sounds weird when I say it like that, but like cute as in like a lovable teddy bear type way.
Yeah, like someone you want to like drink tea with and like eat rock cakes.
And he would like make you, even though he sucks at baking, he would still make you a cake for your birthday. Like he's that type of character. And Robbie Coltrane like really embodied him really well throughout the series. He featured in all the movies, and like he was just so beloved for bringing that character to life. Everyone on the Harry Potter set that he was very comedic, iconic. He was so fun, and even some of his coworkers, like Daniel Radcliffe, who played Harry Potter, said that I've especially fond memories of him keeping our spirits up on the Prisoner of Azkaban movie when we're all hiding from the torrential rain for hours in Hagrid's hut, and he was telling us stories and cracking us jokes to keep morale up. He was just known as a nice, comforting guy. He also appeared in 2 James Bond films, in GoldenEye and The World Is Not Enough, and he's also had like a lot of other works done. For like different TV shows and like comedy series and even drama series, and he's just an amazing like actor and person. His agent Belinda Wright reminisced about their work together. She said, quote, "He will probably be best remembered as Hagrid, a role which brought joy to children and adults alike over the world, prompting a stream of fan letters and just happiness in general. But for me personally, I shall remember him as an abidingly loyal client, as well as being a wonderful actor. He was forensically intelligent."
Forensically?
Oh, yeah. This is like, there's just sometimes where I don't even know where I pull stuff out of. And anyways, forensically intelligent, brilliantly witty, and after 40 years of being proud to be called his agent, I shall miss him. So everyone's paying tribute to him all across Instagram. So many people have posted about him. Honestly, I love Harry Potter with every bone in my body, and it makes me so sad that he died. And honestly, rest in peace, but we'll remember his legacy and what he did for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really sad.
I know. I feel like Harry Potter is just like becoming so much less popular, and it makes me really sad.
I think, yeah, it's like, I don't know. Okay. Anyways, next update is also really sad. It's about a shooting. It was a shooting in Raleigh, which is in North Carolina, and it took place on Thursday, and like 7 people were shot. 5 of them that were shot died from fatal wounds, and one of the 5 victims killed was even like an off-duty police officer who was like on his way to work. So it's just like really sad. And the victims were like a range of different races, and like they aged from 16 to their late 50s, which is really sad because one of the victims was 16 years old, which is like only like that's only like a young teenager, and it's really, really sad. And the gunfire, what happened was the gunfire broke out around 5 p.m. on Thursday, and it was in like a residential neighborhood area around downtown, and police from there said that the teenager fled to like a walking trail in the other direction and continued shooting people. And to me, like, one of the most shocking things about the shooting is that the shooter was a 15-year-old. Like, that's so young to be.
I feel like a lot of shooters recently have been like really young,
but this
scary.
Isn't necessarily like a school shooting though. This was just like a shooting, which is like at a school shooting you would expect them to be younger, but this is like just a shooting in general, which is like really scary. But the 15-year-old was identified as a white male, and he was taken into custody by law enforcement, and they had like gone on a manhunt to try to find him, and it lasted like hours, but then they finally found him and took him in custody. And he was hospitalized and in critical conditioning following the arrest, but authorities have not said like how he was injured, like whether it was self-inflicted or like whether it was like an external force. But the police haven't determined yet a motive for the attack, because it's like it seemed kind of random, because it wasn't like necessarily one particular race, or like it wasn't necessarily one particular gender. It was just kind of like a random group of people ranging from different ages and racial backgrounds. But the suspect is going to be tried as an adult, so he is 15, and like in our country, like usually if you're like below 18 you go to juvie and you're tried as like a minor. But since sometimes like for really, really serious crimes like shootings and murder, you can be tried as an adult even if you're not an adult, just because you need like sometimes the same consequences as an adult would like receive in that situation. But one of the 911 calls took place like during the incident the caller was saying that the shooter was wearing camouflage, and he, quote, walked by and shot a police officer, quote, for no reason. So it seemed really random. And then another person said there was, quote, a kid running around with a shotgun, and he ran into the woods. But Biden made a response to this incident by saying, quote, enough. We've grieved and prayed with too many families who have had to bear the terrible burden of these mass shootings. Too many families have had spouses, parents, and children taken from them forever. So, yeah, whether that means like a change in policy or like something that'll keep like 15-year-olds from getting these guns, and yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to my last update of the week. It's about Adnan Syed. So we talked about him last week as well. I feel like a lot of my updates are just continuations. But it's very interesting, this case. For background, a high school senior named Heyyyy Lee disappeared one day after school in 1999 in Maryland, and a month later, her body was found in a city park. So her body was examined, and they found out that she died by strangling, and her 17-year-old ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed, was arrested for the crime, and within a year, he was sentenced to life in prison. Wow. So I think he's lived, or like, currently he's like lived like around 2 decades in prison, but recently it has come to light that the prosecutors who were like going against Adnan Syed during the original trial kept a lot of like alternative suspects and a lot of evidence secret from the defense attorneys, which is actually a violation of something called the Brady Rule, which requires prosecutors to turn over any evidence that could help exonerate or like save a criminal defendant. Right. So basically, if they turned over this evidence, Adnan Syed originally might not have been put to a life sentence or even like jailed at all. Right. So because this has been brought to light, they basically voided his trial and set him free, and he no longer was in jail. So the prosecutors, the people who were like basically sentencing Adnan, had the decision to retrial him, and they had 30 days to decide whether they wanted to do another trial on him and see if they could get like him sentenced differently or again in another way. But they actually decided that they were going to drop all charges against him. Which happened recently. So they decided to drop all charges against him. So Adnan Syed is a free man. And in case you're wondering, like, what evidence that was, like, not brought to light by prosecutors, the evidence was actually that there was, like, 2 other suspects, and one of them was actually threatened to kill Lee during the investigation. Yeah, and there was also like evidence, like other evidence, but yeah, it's just crazy. And this case is specifically important because it got so famous because of a podcast called Serial, who covered this case back like when it was like fresh, and so it was a very popular case. And now Adnan Syed is free, and I mean, many people think he's innocent with the new evidence, so it's very interesting. Even
like if he isn't innocent, it's still like the process. He didn't really get like a due process with like fair,
he doesn't get like, a fair process.
Yeah, exactly.
And, yeah, I guess it's crazy to like think that like so many innocent people could be like in jail, just because prosecutors didn't bring up evidence or there wasn't evidence at the time, and there is no. It's just like so weird.
It is. Yeah. Anyways. Okay. So my last update, and the last update for this episode, is about Trump and the January 6th committee. So on Thursday, Trump was subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. And as some background, like January 6th was the insurrection when like a group of people who thought the election was stolen like stormed the Capitol with guns, and people ended up dead. And there was like a lot of like violent force, and it was just a really terrible thing. So then there was like a committee made called the January 6th committee, where they were basically like looking into like what happened that day, who was responsible for what, and they've been like sentencing people based on like involvement and stuff and like all this different stuff. So they've been just like really looking in depth into the incident, and a lot of their focus was on Trump because they felt he made some comments that kind of like incited the riot, so they want him to be held responsible and like be accountable for like what he said. So they subpoenaed him, and a subpoena is a court order to like appear in court, so like basically saying like you have to come here. And in response to the subpoena, Trump didn't really like say whether he would go or not, but he made this whole long, huge 14-page letter, and he said a lot of things. Like, he called the committee members, quote, highly partisan political hacks and thugs whose sole function is to destroy the lives of many hardworking American patriots. So he said like a lot of different things. He called the January 6th investigation a, quote, charade and a witch hunt. And then he urged like the committee members to examine what he felt was like all this evidence pointing to election fraud. And then he like made this whole section with like his quote unquote evidence for like the election fraud, and he like had this state by state thing with like all these statistics, and like you might look at that and be like it's convincing, but it's really important to like fact check like where he's getting his sources from, and like how unreliable like his data is, and like what he's saying is about the election, because he like is trying to convince them that like, oh, it was stolen, and he has like all this like what he says is evidence, but it's really not, like when you look in depth and like fact check it. But yeah, so it was just like this whole like huge letter that he made, and it was just like really interesting because he didn't really respond to what they were saying. He just like made this long letter. So
government, am I right?
Yeah,
pretty crazy all around.
Yeah,
just in general.
Yeah,
but politics is just it's so confusing and so stressful.
It is.
We were learning about like the filibuster the other day. I like still don't even understand.
The filibuster is not at all what I thought it was.
I thought it was something entirely different. It's like
I thought it was you needed 60 people to pass something, but it's like it's really like you need 60 people to stop the filibuster. But the filibuster itself is like, I still don't even like.
It's like delays legislation.
Yeah, it's like this whole thing where you delay legislation by like standing up and talking for like 24 hours.
Yeah, and there's like videos of politicians like just they don't want to like stop talking, because if they stop talking then they give up their like talking time to the other party. So they like read random books, The Cat in the Hat.
Like Dr. Seuss.
Dr. Seuss. It's so weird.
Like, wasn't it Green Eggs and Ham?
Yeah.
That the one dude was reading.
Oh my god! And there was like people who like would literally just start rambling or like talking about issues entirely unrelated to like the laws that they're stopping from being passed. Like it's just so weird.
It was weird.
I honestly, still don't even understand. Like why?
Our system of government is so interesting.
Anyways,
but yeah,
basically.
Really interesting.
All right, so that ends off our episode for today. I would say if you like this episode, please follow us, follow the podcast, DM us for any questions. Our social media is at weare_youth.org, and check out our website at weare-youth.org, and stay tuned.
All right, bye.
Bye.